Who knows? Oh, you know what? It's probably from the sage pot here.
Yeah.
What would you like to pray?
Sure. God, we just ask you to be with us, each of us, and each person that checks this out afterwards. And we just ask you to open our hearts, our minds, free us from the things that are tying us down, and let us become more fully your child. And we pray this in all the names that are holy, all the names that are sacred. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. I just realized you know what tomorrow is?
Oh yeah, it's the actual anniversary.
Yeah, tomorrow is the actual birthday of MCC, October 1968. Happy birthday to us all.
Yes.
We're going to have quite an amazing service on Sunday, which is one of the reasons I'm a little bit harried, trying to make sure everything is taken care of. Reverend Don Peterson is going to be preaching. He was the fourth pastor of MCCLA.
He's also the district coordinator for many years.
He was district coordinator. Yeah, I remember it was funny one time when Lee Carlton was the pastor and Don was his assistant pastor, but Don was also his district coordinator. Then Lee was also something over him on the fellowship level. So they were just like these back and forth. But yeah, that was late 70s, early 80s, around in there.
It would have been late 70s because Jerry Ann was here all the way through from 78 to...
Yeah. Well, I remember Don was even, he was Dean of Samaritan while I was a student. And I think he became district coordinator while he was still the Dean of Samaritan. I graduated in 77. So yeah, he's probably district coordinator 75, 76.
Mm-hmm. I knew him in the 90s, but just because I knew when Jerry Ann was there.
Right. And then I remember the first time he preached, he was such a quiet, demure little fellow. Well, not little fellow, big, tall fellow. And everybody was totally blown away when he got up to preach, and he was just a ball of fire. So I'm sure he's going to have some terrific things to say on Sunday. He also has a new book just out that he's going to be signing. And we have a catered luncheon, thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
Down in the social hall, thank you very much, for the first time since COVID time. So it's homecoming. So we're inviting everybody to come home and have a good, I was going to say not a home cooked meal, but have a good meal with your home cooked friends.
Yeah. Well, you know what? A meal that nobody has to really do too much to clean up after.
We hope. No food fights, people. So do you want to kick off? Should we kick off how we're headed tonight, kind of?
Yeah, well, we were finishing up privacy and then beginning the discussion on homelessness. So
if you can talk just a little bit more so that I can get myself set up here.
Okay, so we're going to begin with some technical stuff, but it actually leads into some important discussions. So it's sort of a setup. And then we will get into homelessness and the beginning of that, and income inequality.
Can you talk just a little bit more about something?
Yeah.
I just seem to
Yes.
a little bit we mistake.
So when we're doing the privacy, we're going to pick up. We had sort of laid the foundation with Griswold, and Griswold was that decision that was split in so many different directions, and it had multiple lines. And we're going to be following a couple of those because how that decision split out had a lot to do with how they argued lines of logic after that through the cases that all interweave in privacy, which include not just Doe, but also the ones that relate to gay marriage and to sodomy.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. I seem to have lost part 3, but I'm sure it's here somewhere. And I'm not getting, just hang on one second and let me see if I can get my computer to.
And I noticed that Raina had asked about healthy privacy and health privacy. So if you're referring to health privacy, that we'd have to take a look at, but that's covered by HEPA and all sorts of other things.
But what is HEPA based on?
HEPA is it's the release of medical information. And actually, I guess we could bring that in because that would be like companies having access into health privacy when they paid for the insurance. That's been a big legal issue.
Let's see what's happening here. We might have a problem with Real 3, but let's yeah, no, because I was just thinking, what part of privacy law in the Constitution is HEPA based on?
Oh, that would be probably under again the general welfare, because that's, you know, in terms of the preamble, if you're talking about the lines of logic, or you're talking about the amendments through the Bill of Rights. Well, again, that would just be the general privacy. I mean, I'm not sure whether they based it. I'd have to look it up. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, let's put that on the burner for something we're gonna look up too. And in the meantime, let's
Okay, so I've made a note of that. I'll look that up.
Real 1. Okay, I've got the right thing. There we are. And I'm going to disappear myself from the corner. And y'all watch this, and I'll see if I can figure out what I did with Real 3. Okay, here we go.
It's the 3 of us here again. And we left off with Griswold. So we'll just quickly recap that on Griswold, which was a split division or split decision. There was substantive due process was one of the 3 lines of legal logic that was followed. off of that, there came one row which became using just substantive due process, another group which used equal rights in substantive due process, and one that used the Ninth Amendment and substantive due process. So we're gonna go down those. And initially what happened was the court more or less decided that there was a right to privacy. And over the next few years, they ended up settling on substantive due process, even though only one justice had initially supported that.
So just like I'm a fourth grader,
Mm-hmm.
you're saying that there's an implication of privacy in the Constitution because of something called substantive due process.
Not quite.
Okay.
So substantive due process is a legal theory.
Uh-huh.
And
it
means that the substance of a federal law can't be overruled by a state government. That's through the 14th Amendment, and that's where it comes from. And in this, it gets a little mixed up and a little confusing. So chronologically, what happened was the first major decision was Loving. And Loving was the one that allowed interracial marriage.
Okay, and what was that case?
That was Loving.
But I mean, what was it about?
It was about a Virginia couple that had married an African American woman and a white man. They had been married probably 10 years,
mm-hmm.
and they sued, saying that because they were residents of Virginia, they were denied equal protection. They had gotten married across the border in Maryland.
And interracial marriage wasn't legal in Virginia.
It was not legal in Virginia, nor in most of the South. And when they did, this was decided in 1967. And then this one, like Brown v. the Board of Education, was written by Earl Warren, the Chief
mm-hmm.
Justice. And like that one, he worked really hard to get a unanimous decision.
Now, what was Brown versus Board of Education
Brown versus
about?
the Board of
what
Education was the one that overturned Plessy, which was separate but equal.
Okay.
And this was about equal educational opportunity. And it was in Kansas for the Kansas
right.
court. So Loving was based on equal rights. And initially that's where they went. They also decided on Eisenstadt, the follow-up to Griswold, which had to do with unmarried couples having contraception available to them.
We left that part out of the Griswold recap. What was it about? It was about...
it was about contraception
and
for married couples
having the right.
Connecticut.
And then Eisenstadt was about
unmarried
couples.
Okay. But when it came to abortion, which was at the same time as Eisenstadt, they delayed it. And what they did is re-argued it a second time. Initially, it had been Doe in a secondary case named Roe. And what they did is they reversed them and went with the Texas one, which was Roe.
And what was that about? What was the story?
So Roe was about, that was about the right to abortion. And that was one in which they couldn't decide on where to place it. It wasn't quite equal rights in their view, although that is what most people expected it to be argued under.
Okay.
And so what they ended up doing was delaying And when they did, the Justice Blackmun, who had the opportunity to write the decision, he had been general counsel. I think I said this. He'd been general counsel to the Mayo Clinic.
Yes.
And so he spent the summer research. He went through all of the details and with the latest medical advice, went through the history with the quickening, which was when it first became obvious that a woman was, and came up with the very detailed, but the complaint against it was that it didn't really anchor onto something, which was what the others had done with equal rights, was anchoring onto another thing and then saying that the states could not undo that in some way. And Roe doesn't have the same anchor. The decision was 7-2, so it was a large favoring it, but it was not a unanimous decision.
And it wasn't all split up with different views.
No. And basically the dissent was that the court had no basis for arguing the case at all. So that was the part of the second case was the Doe. And this with restrictions, having to see 2 doctors, and it had resident requirements. And we just on the same time. Roe was the lead decision. And on the restrictions that might that the right to privacy was broad enough to include marriage, procreation, contraception, family relationships, undefined what that is, child rearing, and education. Those were the 2 decisions they came down on. The next big one that came down actually was our community, and that was Bowers. And Bowers had to do with sodomy.
Now that was the case. Oh gosh, I remember so well. District Attorney Charlie Hardwick. I think I got that right. Yeah. At home, in his bedroom, having sex, and a cop literally bangs on the door and comes in.
And it's even more curious because he had a guest sleeping in the living room who opened up the door not knowing what was going on and had no residency, no
right to grant entrance.
And they took that open door as the right to entrance.
Right. So they walked into his house
and then into his bedroom.
Yeah.
So they were in his bedroom before he knew what was going on. And this was like typical Supreme Court elitism. They wanted to argue on the substantive due process and avoid equal protection. The interesting thing on this one is that there's a lot of detail that can be found. There's this guy named Edward Lazarus, who was a clerk, who's written a very detailed book. And they probably, had they gone a different route, they probably would have won.
So explain how substantive due process applies in this case.
Okay, so substantive due process. Let me begin with the obvious, equal rights. okay, they cast that aside. So they argued on substantive due process, which is a little unanchored because they're not anchoring it on anything. And that was the problem. If it's not anchored onto something, all you're saying is the state has to obey, but why does the state obey? You know, what's the substantive due process was initially the idea that when they outlawed slavery, they couldn't reinstitute it in another form. But they avoided the core issue. Aside from whether or not even the term sodomy might be legitimate, or that if you took Jesus's interpretation in Matthew, it would be inhospitality. So they're inviting the policeman in. What's so inhospitable? But I'm only kidding on that one. But you know, it's really a matter of they kind of left it out there. Well, one Justice Powell who is a very old-fashioned Southern Virginia former president of the American Bar Association, you know, the ultimate establishment Southerner. And he started to argue that maybe they should go on Robinson's, which was a case that had been decided in the 60s, that said you cannot criminalize a group based on their identity. So Robinson did not allow them to outlaw classification. In this case, it would have been homosexuals.
Right.
And in the initial case, it was drug addicts. So it kind of avoided the issue of the sexual act. But it would have gone that route. The other one was equal protection. But what happened was, because they were going along this substantive due process, it opened the door for Chief Justice Berger to go in and sort of push his ideological colleague in a sort of crazy direction. There was a memo that was really wild, but and that's how they ended up with Bowers. But Bowers it decided that the states did have the right to forbid sodomy. And that was a big loss. It also started the process of going back and looking at things going forward with another anchor besides just substantive due process.
Okay. Well, there's the first part of this conversation. A couple things occurred to me. After one thing about the Bowers case that I had forgotten about until later on, Garret and Ed and Harold, is that the cop was actually looking into their bedroom window.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He was trying to look into the window, and that's what prompted him to come banging on the door. And I can't remember now why he was peeking in the window, but I do remember that part. The other thing that I think we need to clarify, especially since you put air quotes around sodomy, the definition of sodomy, a lot of people are confused and they assume that means anal sex. In the law, it does not. In fact, it can be defined differently in state to state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It can mean any kind of non-missionary position heterosexual sex. It can cover the entire gamut.
Yeah. And frequently when there's laws on that, there's laws on oral sex and all sorts of other things accompanying it.
Exactly.
And they're usually grouped together in that term. So there's a lot. It's not just limited to that, although that seems to be a major focus, shall we say.
Yeah, it's a big favorite, but it's not the whole enchilada.
Yeah.
And again, one of the reasons that it's wise to remember that is that it affects heterosexual sex as well. You know,
although not in enforcement, just in
not in enforcement, but it could. I mean, Troy used to say, you know, if you're a heterosexual couple and fall out of bed in the middle of the night, you broke 57 state laws before you hit the floor.
Well, you know, in the 60s, William O. Douglas put a footnote in one case because the police department in DC had arrested everyone that had been arrested for public for sex in public, and they had a couple of favorite bathrooms that they would hang out at, but they had never actually made an arrest with all the teenagers that they had checked out, you know, because that was just sort of like, go home and knock it off, you know. And so how things get enforced is a big part of it.
Yes. And the fact that the laws are on the books has its own I'm sorry, Garret, talk for a minute.
Yeah. So Nala's she silenced it. So how the laws get enforced is just as important as what's on the laws. What happened in Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction is they did not have the laws on the books, but they were actually enforcing the equivalency of many of what became Jim Crow laws later on. They were enforcing them, even though they weren't doing it. They were just enforcing sort of a non-existent law. I was talking about Reconstruction. So she's still trying to get.
Somebody came to the door.
Yeah.
And they were actually looking for my neighbor, and so now she's very upset. Nala, come here. Nala, you're on camera. Come on. Let everybody see the pretty dog. There we go. What a sweet, pretty dog.
Yeah.
Yes, that's much better. Thank you very much. The other thing I wanted to mention is that it just started to become more clear to me what you're saying when you're saying about the right being anchored or not anchored. It's kind of like this substantive due process, this assumption of protection is on this scaffolding. And the higher you get up on the scaffolding, the less stable it is. And there was another part of that. It gets again into where do our rights come from? As we talked about it philosophically and theologically before, do we have rights because we are? or do we have rights because of someone's definition of who we are? Can we be defined out of existence? Like you were saying, the candidate, oh, well, you can't say, a whole group of people is against the law. But that was the thing the Supreme Court did not want to tackle, was whether or not homosexuals could be against the law. And that Supreme Court negotiation was, in order to get a majority, they had to give up on the argument about whether or not we could be criminalized as persons, or whether any state could choose to criminalize us as persons, as opposed to criminalizing specific acts. And that's, it should make us in one way feel better, but in another way it's worse. I mean, you can't be an illegal person, but if things that intimately define your personhood are illegal, I can't see why that's not a breach of the 14th Amendment that says the state can't abridge your life and your liberty. Your personhood. But then the argument, of course, in as law and understanding of rights has developed, remember, there was not a notion that a homosexual was a thing, that people, naughty people did naughty things, quote unquote, right? But there wasn't a notion of orientation.
No. And also keep in mind that when you're talking about rural societies, someone who is homosexual may not have even identified themselves in that way. I think about, there was a play, and it was based on a number of different people. Sam, who used to do the Bible study like 20 years ago, was one of the people. But there was this guy, and he was from one of the United Emirates. And when he came to the United States, the thing that shocked him was seeing the term and the definition of homosexuality, because he'd never been able to articulate that. And we've discussed this in a historical context before, but it's very difficult to go back 2 centuries and place ourselves into that social structure, because the social structure is so very different from our current social structure.
That's why talking about being a constitutional or originalist makes absolutely no sense to me at all. You want to live like it's 1789?
It's even beyond that, because they can't even there's no way in which you can get into the minds of every person that's in there. And when they start talking about, historic trends or something, it's like you're cherry picking. It's like, that's why, yes, you can bring it in, but it's not limited to that. Our world is different. It's like when we were discussing the Second Amendment. What they're discussing in the Articles of Confederation is what was, for that time, weapons of war. that they're locking up in arsenals, you know, and we're in a different type of structure. But once again, the idea is that the weapons of that can do massive destruction are not distributed out to go hunting gophers or something.
Right. And we as social beings, you know, we have laws, we have some kinds of rules to help us navigate. But what I'm trying to get at is this idea of these, you know, what's traditional or not traditional, is totally a matter of your own present perception. It's not really a matter, or at least in the Supreme Court opinions, it doesn't seem like it's a matter of actually tracing where society is at. It's more like saying, this is where my head is at, and that's how I'm going to interpret. Just like in interpreting the Bible, you know, this is where my head is at, and so this is how I'm going to read it. What I'm going to read out of it and what I'm going to read into it.
And sometimes it's not even a matter of reading. Sometimes it's like, you know, it's like, you know, the beginning of how a corporation became an individual is shrouded in obscurity because it was a crazy idea to begin with. And it was done to satisfy Gilded Age businessmen. And it expanded their personal power. Now it's played out into our national elections. It's like, it's really quite crazy that they keep going down. I mean, of all the opportunities for stare decisis to be changed, that was
decisis.
Stare decisis is the decision, the history tradition, the decision, the history of the decision. So you're sustaining the tradition so you don't upend law constantly. So the idea
is that you don't break precedent with previous court rulings.
Yeah, you give deference to it.
Give deference to it. You can ultimately say that it might have been wrong, and we've heard that recently, but you're supposed to, and that's what all these justices, hi Mark, all these justices have, you know, said in their hearings that they believe in precedent and they would uphold stare decisis, and then as soon as they could possibly do it, they turned that upside down.
Well, and the other thing is the other big time at which stare decisis was changed was Brown v. the Board of Education. And Earl Warren made a big point about getting a unanimous decision. He spent from October to May whittling that thing down so as to get a unanimous decision, because he realized that that was more important than anything, as important as the decision itself, because that was what gave it strength.
Yeah, exactly. That unanimity about the decision gave it, it's more than gravitas. It's like, it's more trustworthy. It's more grounded, rather than a situation we have now where it's just winning. I have more votes than you, so I win.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to come up with something that really reflects a broader range of opinion. And I mean, this stuff is all, it's important for us to know and understand as justice warriors. If we cannot fight for rights if we don't know what they mean. We cannot fight for rights if we don't know how we got them in the first place and what they're based on, and how we can go on to establish more rights rather than fewer. And to understand that the court system might not be the be all and end all.
Mm-hmm.
That we got to get down to the down and dirty business of legislating.
And as we will discuss also in homelessness and income inequality, the stories we tell each other and the stories we tell ourselves are very important.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to slip into something to where you just accept something without really working through what it is that you're just accepting and what the implications are.
So shall we get on with that second part?
Yeah. Are there any comments did anybody? I can't read them.
No comments. Just hellos and a couple of thumbs upses.
Okay.
So let me get the right thing on the. Whoops! I got the wrong thing. Where's the right thing? There's the right thing. Part 2. Just give me a second here. It's just that queued up. And here it's queued up. And now share my screen.
Oh, just real quickly, the HIPAA laws haven't been challenged in a court, so they don't have
Oh, I see. They're legislation, so they haven't been like defended.
Correct.
Kind of ground. I get it. Okay. All right. I'm cued. We can let's do this. Okay. I'm gonna take myself out, and here we go.
Okay, so we're going to finish up on the right of privacy, and we're going to be doing three today, or in this section. And they all three actually affect our church, our community a lot more, or very directly. That's what I should say. And the first one was Lawrence, which was essentially a re-arguing of Bowers. It was against the same Texas law.
Home invasion.
Yes.
Catching a couple of gay men having sex.
Mm-hmm. It had a couple of little changes to the law, but the essence remained the same. And this time, Justice Kennedy, who wrote the opinion, as he did on all three of the ones that we're going to be discussing. And he is, of course, no longer on the court. He's now replaced by Brett Kavanaugh. Mm-hmm. But essentially what he did is say no, that is not constitutional. And he did it on the 9th Amendment, on the idea of an unenumerated right, the right to privacy. Mm-hmm. And it was a narrow decision. So that's also the other concern, is that these all became, that Kennedy wrote, he was also the deciding vote. I think one of them hit 6, but I can't remember. But most of them, yeah. The second one was Windsor, and that had to do with the Defense of Marriage Act. What that did is basically say that the essence of that was to create a federal marriage law, and that was interfering in the states.
That was Edie Windsor,
Yeah,
whose wife had died, and she wasn't able to get her benefits, her equal benefits.
Her widow's benefits.
Right. I believe they were married in Massachusetts.
I think so. And they'd been together for like 45 years.
Yeah, just forever and ever.
Yes.
And so, and you'll remember her, the wonderful, wonderful older woman, just, with her arms outstretched.
Yes.
Running down the steps of the Supreme Court when we won.
Yeah.
And what it struck down them was that what she was going after was those federal benefits,
right,
and that federal recognition of her relationship.
But what it did is it eliminated DOMA altogether.
No. Just a piece of DOMA.
A piece of DOMA. Right. I'm sorry. Yes.
But it was the crack in the DOMA wall.
But the piece that it cracked was actually more than just her benefits. It was that the essence of DOMA was taking away. It was usurping a right, or not a right, an authority or a power that a state had.
Okay.
And then the third one, which was Obergefell, and we had this. We neither one of us can remember how to pronounce it from one week to the next, but it's Obergefell, and Obergefell said that that you couldn't discriminate. It was done on equal rights, and that same-sex marriage was legal. It did more than strike down DOMA. It was striking down actually that state law that Windsor had pushed back to.
That was also a case of Obergefell was a gay man whose husband was critically ill. And it had to do, I believe, with the healthcare commissions, or...
It had to do with everything.
Yeah. All the authorities and permissions that would go with being married,
right,
in that situation where he's got to try and fly this poor man to, a different clinic out of state with, all the medical equipment, and,
right,
etc.
And keep in mind that what it basically also did is say that because you have to respect the laws of or the rights of one person in another state, and
much like the Loving case,
or like Dred Scott,
in
the reverse direction,
right?
And in fact, much like a lot of the laws that have come down, that my rights as a person don't change from one state to the next. In actuality, they seem to, but they're not supposed to.
And that's, again, what's on the line right now.
Absolutely.
Is this whole states' rights thing is, if you want to be queer, go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Move, go to California.
Right.
And
so, and these are the ones that affect us. They affect us as gays. They affect us if people are going to be planning families, which is something else that has come.
Yes.
That when you and I were young, that wasn't even possible. People were being sued to have their own children taken away. And
now we have, having to take 10-year-olds across the border to another state for health care.
It's just unbelievable. So I think that with this, unless you have something that you would like to add.
Well, I just was thinking, when we talk about rights and community, when I imagine a states' rights world here, it's terribly hard to imagine. Imagine a world where in Mississippi, it's against the law to have an MCC.
States powers.
States powers, exactly. And what that kind of world would mean for us ethically,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And it also brings to mind how we, as we've talked about before, how do we spread the ethic? How do we spread the ethics of the gospel through the language of rights? To create the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what we're really trying to do.
Yes.
We talk about separation of church and state, but really it's like Martin Luther King, the moral impact, the ethical impact. How do we get that expressed in rights language, in justice language, in civic language?
And in civic, yes. Mm-hmm. And a big part of that is that a separation of church and state doesn't mean that you leave your ethics and values at the door.
That's right.
It means
you leave your dogma at the door.
Yeah. It means that you don't get to, I don't get to tell you what you're going to believe in.
Right.
And you don't get to tell me what I'm going to believe in.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that I have the right to disrespect your right, or that you have the right to disrespect my right.
Exactly.
I think that's a good ending point.
Indeed, it was a good ending point. Mutual respect is theoretically what the law is supposed to be facilitating, right? I'm not hearing you. Are you there? You're muted, Garret.
It reminds me of, if you remember the show Designing Women,
mm-hmm.
and the one said, oh, the purpose of manners is so that we can be civil with one another and communicate. And I thought, boy, wouldn't that be wonderful if it were only true? But that's kind of what the idea behind laws and, you know, courtesy, cultural courtesies. It's about how to navigate communicating with one another and living together and respecting one another. And that is what they're about, or that's what they should be about at their highest level.
Before it became a pejorative, that's what being politically correct meant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but now that, as well as manners, are a thing to be scoffed at.
Yes. Okay. So then why don't we let you go, and we'll just go ahead and conclude a few minutes early.
Okay. And then we'll pick up and of course, anybody that wants to, you can still join us online anytime.
Mm-hmm.
On the Founders FMCC Facebook page. Segments are going up as we speak.
Okay. So,
okay.
Yeah, God, we thank you for this time. We thank you for the people that come in to check it out. And we thank you for this time of sharing. Just pray for healing for your headache to go, and for all of us to do better in this world. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Garret.
All right. Thank you.
Together. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us. And we will do more. Don't forget, October 9th, Sunday, October 9th, will be anniversary Sunday at FMCC.
Right.
Homecoming. Come on home. And enjoy a lovely meal, and enjoy Reverend Don Peterson, and enjoy each other's company. It's been a while.
Yes. All right.
Okie dokie.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Well,